Does this look familiar? I think that it does. I think for many of us, we've placed ourselves in positions like this far too often. We attempt to fly VFR in conditions which are actually IMC or IFR conditions, and our accident rate is indicative of this. We must stop trying to fly in conditions which are not suitable for VFR flight. The weather information provided by an ASOS or an AWOS, ATIS, a METAR, all of that information is normally provided by an automatic sensor located on the surface, or actually about 1.5 to 2.5 meters above the surface, 5 to 8 feet above the surface. And clearly, because it's on the surface, it only provides surface information. It does not provide in-flight weather information. Of course, we don't fly on the surface. We fly at altitude, some value above the surface, 300, 400, 500, 600, 1,000 feet. We fly at altitude. And we know that the regulations for Part 91 require that a helicopter pilot maintain clear of clouds at all times and have at least 1/2 mile of visibility during the day or 1 mile of visibility at night. And that visibility is in-flight visibility. And how do we define that? What is in-flight visibility? Well, it is the distance you can see from the cockpit and identify a prominent object. So when you're flying the ship and you can see a large building or a smokestack or some large prominent object, and you determine that that distance is 1/2 mile, 3 miles, whatever the distance is, that's how you define in-flight visibility. Of course, the problem is it's not simply prominent objects which are a danger. It's non-prominent objects as well. Things like antenna, power lines, towers. These items, these objects are very dangerous as well. Before you accept a flight into marginal VFR conditions, I would ask you to consider three things before you depart. First, keep in mind that the weather required to successfully shoot an instrument approach, a non-precision instrument approach, into an airport in the United States is nominally around a 500-foot ceiling and a mile, 1 statute mile of visibility. So if the weather you're contemplating flying in is near those values, ask yourself, is it wise to attempt to fly a helicopter VFR in weather below what is required to shoot an instrument approach into that area? And second, keep in mind the weather you're predicating your decision to fly upon is most likely a surface observation. Be careful, because on days when the ceiling is low and the visibility is poor, it's on these days when the temperature and dew point spread is likely very close. And as we go up in altitude, that spread doesn't typically expand, it collapses, it becomes closer. Thus, when we go up in altitude on such a day, it's more likely than not that we will have less visibility. And finally, imagine that you suffer an in-flight emergency. You have an engine failure, a tail rotor malfunction, an electrical system failure, a communication failure, an ill passenger. The list goes on and on. In that circumstance, did your decision to fly in poor weather increase or decrease the likelihood that you can successfully manage the emergency? Remember that the regulations specify the absolute minimums. They may not be appropriate for the circumstance you find yourself in. It's up to you as the pilot in command to determine what is reasonable. You must determine that. I would suggest that you set a set of personal minimums and then abide by those minimums. If you find yourself in a poor weather environment, please land the helicopter. Land and live. When you know you're in an unsafe environment, do not continue. The inconvenience of an off-airport landing is minor compared to an accident.